Hey everybody, my name is Walter Trout, and you are right here listening to the Blues Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the Blues Podcast. My name is Big Boy Bloater, and this is a very strange blues podcast this time. It's an odd episode, but through the miracle of technology, I'm able to say that I'm here virtually talking to guitar virtuoso and absolute legend, Walter Trout. How you doing, man?
I'm okay, man. You know, I feel like I've been sitting in my house now for about 9 years. Other than that, I'm doing fine, you know? Just trying to get through this.
It's kind of a weird thing, eh? It's how are you coping with the whole lockdown thing at the moment?
You know, the real sort of tragedy of the whole thing to me, other than, you know, the illness and people dying and everything, but for musicians and for myself and my band and my friends, all the work is gone. You know, I had an amazing tour, you know, summer of touring booked ahead of me, probably my best summer of touring with great shows and big festivals, and it's all gone. And the guys in my band are struggling, and all the musicians I know are struggling right now. And so, you know, I'm kind of lucky in that if I have to be stuck at home here, I'm with my wife, and you know, a couple of our boys are here, and it's not like I'm alone and lonely, but and I'm in Southern California. It's 75 degrees out, and it's beautiful, but still, I miss so deeply playing for people, playing my guitar and looking them in the eye. I'm a guy who I thrive on playing live. And to get on that stage and come out and play for somebody and look them in the eye, I'm going to lose it here. But I really miss that badly.
I know exactly what you mean. It's going on stage and feeding off that energy of the audience, isn't it? It's you can have you can be having a real down day, but when you get on the stage and the audience are there, kind of right behind you, it just energizes you, doesn't it?
And that's it. And you're communicating with them, and you can look down and see that what you're doing is affecting them, and you're bringing some joy into their life, you know. And one of the things that I love about what I do is meeting them afterwards, going to the merch booth and meeting the fans and shaking their hands and talking to them and hearing their stories. And I love that interaction with people. I'm a guy that really kind of thrives on that stuff. So that's a big hole in my life right now. I mean, I sit and I practice my guitar. I'm trying to keep my chops up, but it's not the same, you know.
It's not the same as having the adrenaline of being on stage and the danger. Or if you screw up at home, you just start again, right? It doesn't matter. Nobody's watching. There's no danger there, right?
No. And that's also the thing, is that one of the really exciting parts about being a touring musician, and you'll understand this, is when you're on tour, your next gig could be the best gig you've ever done, or it could be the worst gig you've ever done. And you never know until you walk out on that stage and start playing. There's so many variables, you know, every night. So even if you have a bad gig one night, like when I have a bad gig and I feel uninspired and I feel like I'm just going through the motions, I feel incredibly guilty, and I go to my hotel room and I look in the mirror and I go, you know, you let them down. They paid to come see you and you didn't do it. So then the next night can be the greatest gig you've ever had. You can get so inspired that you feel like you're levitating, and the audience goes there with you. And when that happens, there is this mutual feeling of just magic, you know?
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
I know you do.
We'll come back to talking about live gigs and everything going on in a little while. But for now, I want to go right way back, if we can, right to the very, very start, back in your early years in New Jersey. Do you remember getting your first guitar?
I do. I started taking trumpet lessons when I was 5 years old, and I was really going to be a jazz trumpet player.
Really?
And that's what I was heavy into, man. For my 10th birthday, my hip mother arranged it that I spent the afternoon with Duke Ellington and his orchestra.
Wow.
And I sat in the dressing room in a theater with those guys for hours, and I got a trumpet lesson from the incredible Cat Anderson, who was the guy in the orchestra who played all the high notes. And he tried to teach me the embouchure. And I sat on this white couch with Duke Ellington and talked to him. And Tony Bennett was there. My mom was off trying to, hit on Tony Bennett, but I was just interested in the musicians, So I was really into that stuff. And then one day, my older brother, I talk about him a lot in interviews, but he knew I loved music and my parents loved music. And my brother brought home an album and said, I know this is not what you're into, but I want you to give this guy a listen. There's something here that I have not heard before. This was 1961 or 62. And it was the first album by Bob Dylan. And it was so different than anything I had ever heard. And there was something in those songs and that voice. The guy was 20 years old and he sounded like he was 85 and had been traveling in boxcars for 50 years, and I was just taken with that music, the simplicity of it, but the potency and the depth that he could express with the simple little 3 chords in the lyrics. And I really started listening to that album all the time. And I was 10 years old. And then one day my brother again came home and said, man, I got you an acoustic guitar. It was a shitty guitar. It had nylon strings and high action, but he said, here you go. And I bought a Mel Bay chord book and I started teaching myself the guitar, and I became a folk singer. I was still playing the trumpet, but I got pretty good at, I could go to parties and sing Blowing in the Wind and, stuff like that. And then the whole world in America changed on February the 9th, 1964 at 8 o'clock Philadelphia time when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan. And I was 13. And here were these 4 guys that played as if it was one person. I can't overstate the impact that had on kids my age in America. The world was different the next day, and it never went back to what it had been. So then, hey, I got to get an electric guitar, and I started jamming with my buddies and playing in the basements and trying to learn, I Want to Hold Your Hand and stuff like that. And then a year later in 1965, once again, my older brother came home and said, I know you like the guitar and you're really into the guitar now. Sit down, I'm going to play you something. And it was the first Paul Butterfield album.
Wow,
with Mike Bloomfield. And it had, Born in Chicago and Blues with a Feeling and stuff. And in 1965, when you were used to hearing George Harrison and Keith Richards playing their guitar solos, and then here comes Mike Bloomfield, and he's playing it like the speed of light with all this passion and fire, but he's playing blues, but he's playing it like this wild, untamed animal, As soon as I heard that, I said to my brother, there it is, that's what I want to do. So at that point I was 14, and I went to my mother and said, I'm going to be a blues guitar player, and I never looked back.
What do you remember what your mother said to that when you said you're going to be a blues guitar player?
She just said, that's nice, Walter. That's good. But a couple of years later.
Or she thought it'd just be a passing fad kind of thing?
Well, I have to say, a lot of my friends who are musicians will tell you that when they were kids, their parents would say, no, you need to have a real job and you need something to fall back on and you need to do this. That's just a pipe dream. My mother always said to me, even around the time I was 15 or 16, she would say, I hear you playing in the bedroom. I hear you sitting in the living room, and I think you can do it. But if that's what you want to do, you need to work hard at it. And if the guy down the street is practicing 4 hours a day, you better practice 6 hours a day, because the guy who works harder at it is going to go further. And she never gave me the go get a real job thing. Either did my father. So I was very lucky in that respect, you know.
Yeah, it's not many musicians that can say that their parents were completely behind them when they turned up and said, "Hey guys, I'm going to be a musician and, you know, grow my hair long."
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it worried them, like, God, what's going to become of this kid? And I remember saying to them, look, I love doing this so much that if I turn 50, she'd go, well, what if you don't make it, you know? And I'd say, well, if I turn 50 years old and I'm still playing down at the corner bar for 10 drunk guys, at least I'll be playing. I'll be doing what I love doing. And I'm not worrying about making a bunch of money. I'm not trying to be a pop star here. I want to play music on my guitar. And I remember being 50, turning 50, and I was out on tour with my band, and we played in this little shithole blues club out in mid-America. And about 6 people showed up, and I thought, well, God's calling in the chips here on that quote, you know. But I told her, I want to do what I love doing, and I'm not out to just spend my life chasing making money. These guys that work all their life and they get 2 paid vacation weeks, and then they go on a vacation, and then when they turn 65 over here, they retire and they go fishing and they take a trip to Switzerland or something. I was not interested in doing something just because I want to make money. I wanted to chase my passion and my love. And it's funny, when our oldest son was in the 2nd grade, his teacher asked the class, I want you all to write a sentence of what you consider success. And he wrote, doing what you love. So, you know, my whole family's kind of focused on that.
I think that's a great lesson to teach your kids, isn't it? That's a fantastic thing. If you can pass that on to your children, I think you've definitely been a success. That's for sure.
Well, you know, I feel like I have been a success as a musician. I just finished my 29th album under my own name, you know, and but even if I hadn't, I would still be doing this. If I was still playing down at the bar, I'd still be doing it, you know, sleeping on, well, I'm glad I don't have to sleep on my buddy's couch. I went for many years of that stuff, you know.
I bet your buddy's glad about that as well.
Yeah, I bet he is. That's good answer there.
So you're a teenager, you've got yourself an electric guitar, you're doing blues jams, kind of, you know, it's all kind of, everything seems to be exciting and all that. What was the first band you actually got into as right, you know, I'm in a band now, we're like a gang, we're going to take over the world?
Okay, I was in high school, and I went into the 9th grade. I started in a new school in the 9th grade, a school where my mother got the job as the librarian. She was on the faculty. And I met a fellow there. I still, I talk about him a lot. His name is Jack Jeckett. And it was like meeting Paul McCartney. He could play every instrument. You could give him some weird instrument that he'd never seen. He'd go off into a room for a half an hour and come back out playing the thing. He wrote songs, he played great, he sang great, you know, and he really started showing me a lot of stuff on the guitar. And he and we started having little bands all through high school, and maybe playing at Battle of the Bands and doing that kind of stuff. And as soon as we got out of that school, as soon as we graduated from 12th grade, he went to college, a local college, and majored in music. And he got all these music majors and started a band, and I became the guitar player. And we were a big group. We had a big horn line. So we were working in clubs, and we were doing Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and we were doing Chicago Transit Authority, and we were doing Stax, you know, Otis Redding tunes, a lot of Stax stuff, and we were doing Motown stuff. And every once in a while, I'd get to do a Muddy Waters song, you know. But it was playing music in the club circuit on the East Coast, which is a really, back then, was a thriving circuit of nightclubs. And we became very popular, and we worked all the time. So right out of high school, I was in a working band. We weren't really a blues band, but I was playing rock and roll and R&B, and I was making a living, and it was great, you know. And he kind of ended up having to get a day job. He got married, and I ended up sort of with the band, and I fired the horn line, and it became a 4-piece band, just like I have now. And we started doing a lot of my songs. And as soon as that happened, we couldn't get a gig. Nobody wanted to hear us, you know. As long as we were doing Try a Little Tenderness, or we were doing Evil Ways, or we were doing Brown Sugar, or we were doing Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is, we were working all the time. But as soon as it was Walter's fronting the band and he's writing all the songs, it was like, we don't want to hear this shit. But so that lasted for a little while, and I ended up just moving to California one day, figuring that New Jersey at that point was a dead end. So to be perfectly honest, I had a Volkswagen Beetle. I had a Gibson 335, a Fender Super Reverb, a Martin D28, a mandolin, a trumpet, all my clothes, a half a pound of marijuana, and 30 hits of LSD, and $150, and I drove across the country. I hallucinated my way to California.
It's amazing that you actually got there.
You know, it took a while, you know. I took my time, you know, but
had you actually set out for California, or was that just where you ended up, where you kind of run out of Castle?
I set out for California. I had some friends that lived in Costa Mesa, and I had come and visited them for a week, and I had seen that there was a great club scene in LA and Orange County. And I went back to my band and said, if we all move to California, we can work. Our band could work in Los Angeles. And they all said, yeah, let's go. And one by one, they dropped out till I said, well, if you guys aren't going, I'm going to go on my own. And I took off. And they all figured I'd drive 50 miles and turn around, but I didn't. I got out here. I can tell you a real quick little story. I arrived in Costa Mesa on Halloween, 1974. I had just driven 3,000 miles. I had taken 11 days. I was really kind of mentally out of my mind at this point from, you know, weed and acid. And they said, we're going to a Halloween party. Do you want to go? And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. You know, I just got here. I just drove 3,000 miles. They said, you need a costume. I said, I don't have a costume. Well, anyway, this guy says, I have a full body gorilla suit. You want that? I said, yeah, give me the gorilla suit. So I put on the full gorilla suit with the head and the whole thing. I gave everybody of my friends, I gave them all a hit of LSD. We went to the party. I started having really the ultimate bum trip. Like, my God, I got to go back to New Jersey. What am I doing here? This is horrible. I don't know anybody. And I was freaking out. And I walked out of the party and I started walking down the street. And then I realized I was completely lost. I was in a new town. I couldn't find the party. I couldn't find the house we lived in. I was lost, wandering the streets of Costa Mesa, peaking on LSD, dressed as a gorilla. And I wandered into a little cafe. I sat down at the counter. I took my gorilla head off. I stuck it on the counter. A waitress came over and said, "Can I help you?" And I just went, and I started sobbing, and I had a nervous breakdown. Well, she took care of me, and she got me a cup of coffee, and I explained the whole thing to her. And she said, "Do you know the name of the street their house is on?" I said, "Yeah, College Avenue." So she drew me a little map, and I finally ended up back at the house. Well, 4 years later, I was in the Happening band in Orange County. I was the lead player of the Happening group, the big popular group. There's a girl there, and I'm looking at her, and she's looking at me, and "Where do I know you from?" And she looks at me, and she goes, "Oh my God, you're the gorilla." It was the waitress. And she became a fan of the band. But anyway, I don't know why I told you that, but that was my first night in California. I was lost on acid, dressed as an ape,
That's a great story. I mean, that's a song right there, surely.
Well, I don't know. You could put that in a movie and people would go, "Yeah, this doesn't happen," but that's a true story. I should have known right then it was going to be a tumultuous experience out here,
Yeah, but glad you did it though, right? So those early days, you started working with some pretty big names. I was reading earlier on, you were playing with people like John Lee Hooker, Big Mama Thornton. I bet that was quite an education. On fire.
Here's how that happened. Like I said, that 4 years after I got out here, I was playing, and I was in the Happening club band of Orange County. We were called Midnight Angel, and we had Danny Timms on piano, who went on to play with Paul Simon and Bonnie Raitt. And, it was a great band. We had 5 lead singers, so we had 5-part harmonies, and it was an awesome band. And we were the house band at this beautiful club in Costa Mesa that was packed every night. But we were doing Eagles and Beatles and Stones, and we were doing dance music for people to come in every night and dance and rock out. Leonard Skinner and stuff like that. Whatever was happening, we did a lot of Little Feat. But this buddy of mine said, once in a while I would play like a Muddy Waters song, or I'd do Born in Chicago or something, but we were basically a club band. And this friend of mine named Brant Bindley, who I still know, dear friend, said to me, "Hey, Walter, I was up on the Redondo Beach Pier last Sunday, and there's a little club there, and there's these older black fellows, and they just play stone blues." And I told them, I have a guitar player friend, and could I bring him in? And this keyboard player said, "Yeah, bring him." So Sunday came around, and we went up to the Redondo Beach Pier, and my friend said, "This is Walter. You told me he could sit in." And the keyboard player went, "No, we don't know." And my friend went off. "Hey, we drove an hour and a half, and you told me he could play." So keyboard guy, the B3 guy, goes, "Yeah, okay, let him play a song." I played a song. He said, "Oh, well, play another song." I played another song. He said, "Why don't you stay up for the set?" I stayed up for the set, and he immediately said, "Hey, you want to join the band?" And well, it was Deacon Jones and Finest Tasby, and it was the Coast to Coast Blues Band, who were John Lee Hooker's backup band. And they had a Sunday afternoon gig on the pier without John Lee Hooker, but it was his band. And suddenly, with these guys, Finest went on to be the lead singer of the Manish Boys. And Deacon Jones had been with Freddie King for 13 years, and he was John Lee Hooker's band director. And those were the guys I just fell in with, and they adopted me and mentored me. And I was the only vanilla fella in the band, and I was the only guy under 50 years old. I was like 26 or something like that. And with those guys, I played with John Lee Hooker and Big Mama Thornton and Percy Mayfield and Bo Diddley and Lowell Folsom and Pee Wee Creighton and Eddie Cleanhead Vinson and O.B. Wright and Joe Tex. And I can't remember them all. We were the band when guys would come to L.A., these blues dudes, the real blues guys, they would come there and they would just hire that band to back them up. And Deacon and Finus, like I say, they mentored me, and that was an education. I played with those guys for 2 years. And most nights I was the only white guy in the place. And it was an incredible education, and it was some of the most fun I have ever had in the music business. I just had a blast with those guys, man. It was wild, and it was crazy, and it was the real thing. And I was in seven heaven, man, playing with those dudes. I was like, this is it, man. This is what I've been hoping for all my life, Was
there a favorite at that time that you really look back and think, well, that was, God, that was the gig that really, meant so much to me?
I did a lot of gigs with those guys, and every one was a little different. A lot of it was just nightclubs in Watts or in Compton. It was the hood. And but probably some of the shows I did with John Lee Hooker were a lot of fun. Now, you have to understand that at that point in like 1978, the blues was at a low point, right? Yeah. Saturday Night Fever was out, and everything was disco music. And you would go play with John Lee Hooker, this icon, and you'd be in a little club and play to 50 people, It was not like big shows or anything. Big Mama Thornton would put the hat out for tips, but still it was just an amazing experience. It was something I treasure in my memories as just being a glorious kind of shining moment of my life.
And just on the flip side of that question, come on, who was the worst one? Do you remember ever thinking, oh man, I never want to play with this person ever again? I mean, I played with a lot of guys, my heroes, and they always say, don't meet your heroes. Pretty much most of them have been fantastic, but there's been a couple, and I thought, I just can't ever listen to your records again now after that experience. Do you ever get that at all?
That happened to me later when I was with John Mayall, when I was with Canned Heat. Yeah. And I don't want to badmouth the guy. I mean, but if you read my book, it's in there.
Yeah.
There's a book out written by British journalist Henry Yates. It's a biography of me, and I tell the story. I had some really bad experiences with Albert King, and I can't listen to him anymore.
Right, yeah.
I can't stand if he comes on the radio. I change the station. I got rid of all his records. I don't have his music, and I don't want to know about the man. So that one, as far as the worst, yeah, that one's. But I don't want to badmouth the guy. He's an icon. He made great music, but I wish I hadn't have met him.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a couple of experiences like that, but hey, you just got to move on, right? Just got to move on. Think about the good times.
There's a couple that I can't say were bad guys, but they were weird. I literally backed up Van Morrison in Carnegie Hall, but we were not allowed to rehearse with him.
Right, yeah.
So I am in Carnegie Hall playing behind Van Morrison, and we haven't rehearsed. And he never said a word to the band. We came out one side, he came out the other. He turned around and called a song, and you better know the song. And then he would do stuff like he turned around at one point. It was the Lead Belly Festival, which I also did at Royal Albert Hall, right? But Van Morrison turned around. He had a 12-string on because we're doing Lead Belly. Turned around at one point and he yelled "Boogie in G," and he counted to 4. And I gotta say, he gave me a couple of solos, and at the end of the solos, he smiled. But then at the end of the set, he walked off. We walked off the other end, and I'm like, God, I just played a set with Van Morrison. We never even said hello, you know. So I can't say if he's a bad guy or a good guy. I have no idea, but I can say I played at Carnegie Hall and I backed up Van Morrison, you know, and that's a big memory for me.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great one. Actually, funny enough, I got a friend who was supposed to be doing a gig with Van Morrison, and they got a rehearsal. They got a rehearsal, and they did a whole rehearsal, and the whole time, Van wouldn't look him in the eye. They weren't allowed to look him in the eye or anything. They weren't allowed to. They were over at one side of the room, and Van was over the other side of the room, and they played a few songs, and then he just walked off into the office for about 10 minutes. He came back out, walked out the door, and his manager came out and said, "Yeah, Van says you're all sacked." And that was it. They never got to do the gig. But there you go. Yeah, that's right.
Well, yeah.
So let's talk about Canned Heat and John Mayall. Well, how did that come about with those guys?
Okay, with Deacon and Finus. I started playing with some other fellas also when I was in Deacon's band, right? And there was an old piano player. You might, being the blues aficionado, you might remember a fella named J.D. Nicholson. You can look him up. He was a piano player from Chicago. He had made records back in the late 40s and early 50s. You can find his records on YouTube, J.D. Nicholson. But he was like 80 years old, and he was the keyboard player. And we were called J.D. Nicholson and the Soul Benders. And we had the Tuesday night house gig at a legendary club called the Lighthouse in Hermosa Beach. It's a famous jazz club. And we played there every Tuesday night for months. And one night, and JD used to let me front the band. He'd go, "Hey, well, come on, sing one." And he'd let me sing, you know, he'd put me out in front. And he was an awesome guy. And one night, some really crusty looking biker guys came in and were listening to me play. And the next week they came in again, and they came up to me and said, "Hey, we're Canned Heat." And it was actually Canned Heat's management and 2 of the guys from the band. And the management at the time, how can I put this? They were members of a very well-known motorcycle club that shall remain nameless. Yeah, I have been instructed not to name the club in any of my dealings. But you can imagine, very well-known club. They were managing the band, and they said, "We have a tour of Australia coming up, and Henry Vestine is drinking too much. So would you come do the tour with us?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So they said, "We're going to break," because Bob Haidt had just died. The bear had just passed away. And the guys said, "We're going to break up because Bob Haidt's dead, but we're committed to do this last tour. We have to do the tour, and we don't want to take Henry. So it's one tour, but do you want to do it?" So I said, "Yeah, let's go." I went off to Australia with Canned Heat. And at the end of the tour, they were all like, "This band's really good. Let's keep going." And that turned into a 4.5-year thing. But so I was out touring the world with them and making records, but we got a gig in 1982. Mr. Mayall had put together the original Bluesbreakers. He'd put them back together. It was Mick Taylor, John McVie, and Colin Allen. And we were scheduled to open for them for 3 shows. up in Northern California. It was like Santa Cruz, San Jose, and San Francisco, or Berkeley or something. And we went up and opened for them. And after the show, John just walked up to me and he said, "Man, I love the way you play." And he and I hung out that night and we hit it off. We immediately became friends. He was still drinking at the time, so we got shit-faced, roaring drunk together, and we talked about music. And he said to me at the end of the 3 nights, he said, "I'm going off and doing a West Coast tour with these guys. Is Canned Heat working?" And I said, "No, we only have these 3 shows, and then we don't have anything for a couple of months." And he said to me, "I'd like to hear you play rhythm for Mick Taylor. Would you like to come out and do the shows?" So there I was touring the West Coast with Mick Taylor, McVie, and Colin Allen, and John Mayall as a member of the original Bluesbreakers, which blew my mind because half the shit I knew to play on the guitar, I learned off the Beano album and the Crusade album and the stuff he did with Peter Green, right? I mean, I studied those records. I can play, solos note for note, That's how you learn, right? When you're a kid and you're trying to learn, you learn what your heroes are doing and then you try to take it somewhere else. But so I did a bunch of gigs with them and I had an awesome time. But then, he said, "Well, we're going to go off to Germany or something, so I'm not going to take you." And then I went back with Canned Heat. And about a year later, John called up the management of Canned Heat and said, "I've gotten rid of the original Bluesbreakers. I'd like to do a tour and have Canned Heat as my backing band." So then we went out and toured for a year as Canned Heat with John Mayall. And we'd do an hour set of Canned Heat, and then we'd bring him up and we'd do an hour of John Mayall. And that was great fun. And after that, that was in like probably 83 or 84. And near the end of 84, he called me and said, "I'm going to put a brand new Bluesbreakers together. And would you come be the guitar player?" And of course, if John Mayall calls you and asks you to play guitar in his band, you fall on your knees and weep for a while, and then you thank God that you're alive,
Absolutely, yeah. You are clean and sober now these days, aren't you? But back then, it was pretty heavy going sometimes, right?
It was heavy going, yeah. I got sober on July the 9th, 1987. If you read the book that Henry Yates wrote about me, John wrote the preface, and he says in there that he and I bonded over our love of alcohol. And he had here's a story for you. He had a bottle that he had made a label for called Chateau Hibiscus. And at the end of the night in the clubs, when they closed the door, he and I would walk through the clubs and we would take the half-finished drinks and we would pour them into the wine bottle. We'd shake it up and we'd cap it, and then we'd let it age overnight. And the next day in the van, we'd sit in the back seat and we'd uncap it and we'd each have our wine glass and we'd be like, "It's a wonderful bouquet. It's kind of a mix of Pernod and Budweiser, and that was Chateau Hibiscus, and nobody else in the band would drink it, but I would sit there with him and we'd finish off those bottles. And yeah, he was, that guy's a trip, man. That guy is one of the more unique people I've ever known, and I love him like a father.
That is dedication to drinking, isn't it? That really is. You've got to be dedicated to go that far.
Hey, well, let me tell you, here's a good one. The first night of the gig where Canned Heat opened for the Bluesbreakers, I was walking back to the hotel, and there was Mick Taylor and John McVie sitting outside on the steps. I hadn't met them yet. This was the first show, right? And I walked up and I said, "Hey, I'm Walter. I'm in Canned Heat. How you doing?" I looked down, and this is an honest to God true story. They had a bottle of orange juice They had a bottle of rubbing alcohol and they were mixing drinks. And I said, why are you drinking rubbing alcohol? And John McVie said, 89 cents a bottle. Now, Rumors was out, right? The guy's a millionaire, but it's 89 cents a bottle. And anyway, I said, you know, guys, I have a big fifth of Smirnoff up in my room. You want to drink? There's some real stuff. So we went up to my room. Some guys from Canned Heat came over and we had a party with my bottle of Smirnoff. John McVie passed out on the floor, unconscious. And we had tapes playing. I had a cassette player and we were listening to blues. John McVie was snoring. He was out, man. And time to change the tape, I went over and said, does anybody want to hear? And John McVie's head popped up off the floor. His eyes opened and he said, please, no Stevie Nicks. And his head went back down on the floor. That's another true story. I had a great time with those guys.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah. I mean, sober since 1987 now. I mean, which is absolutely a fantastic achievement. It's brilliant. Well done. You know, that's something to really be proud of. Is it tough being around drinkers and people these days doing that kind of stuff?
I had to, it's the cliche, but it's the truth. I had to hit the bottom, you know. I had to really decide I have to do this. And I tried it a couple of times and kept relapsing, but then I was in East Berlin, Germany with the Bluesbreakers, and basically Carlos Santana did like a 3-day intervention on me in a hotel. He came to we were all in the same hotel in East Germany. In East Berlin, it was communist, and he came to the gig and he came up to me afterwards and he said, what are you doing? The hell's with you? And I'm shit-faced drunk and I thought I'd played great. Let's just kick that, we're fucking. And he was like, he said, you've been given a gift. You've been given a gift for music and you are in a famous band and you are standing that guitar slot in the Bluesbreakers. There are 100,000 guitar players in the world that would give anything to be in that slot. And you've been given a gift of music and you're so drunk on stage. And this is what he did. He said, you're doing this to where you got the gift. And he pointed up at the sky and he gave me a book and said, go up and read this book and come back and we'll talk. And I read the book and it was about figuring out that everybody has something they're good at. Everybody has some sort of gift they've been given. Everybody has some ability that they have that they can do better than other things. And you need to find out what it is and you need to develop it and nurture it and do your best to share it with the world. And by doing that, you are doing your part to make the world a little bit better place. And you need to be serious about sharing your gift and about utilizing it and about using it to help the world. Whatever it is, maybe you're a good car mechanic. If that's what you are, be the best damn car mechanic you can be, whatever it is. And then I came downstairs the next day. I stayed up and read the whole book. And then he and I basically hung out in that hotel and we talked for 2 days. And I went to Mr. Mayall and I said, you will never see me high again. And I was done.
Wow. That's impressive.
By that time, John was sober. After that Chateau Hibiscus tour, John got sober.
That's enough to put anyone off, right?
But John got sober, most of the time when I was in his band, the actual Bluesbreakers, he was sober, very serious about being sober. And so God bless the man. He put up with me for a good amount of years of my drinking and my drugging and my philandering. And he always believed in me. And he put up with behavior from me that was just horrific when I look back at it. And every time I'm with him, we kind of discuss it, and I always end up saying, I still can't figure out why you kept me in the band with some of my shenanigans and the way I was. And he always says, well, Walter, there was a certain humor to it. But then he will tell me, he'll say, but he goes, no matter how high you got, you always were able to play. He said, if you got to the point where you could not play my music, I would have canned you immediately. But you never got that bad. You always played. And but so he put up with a lot.
I want to talk a little bit about Marie, if that's all right. Your wife,
Yeah.
she manages you. You guys met in Denmark, right? Back in the beginning of the 90s. Do you remember meeting up?
Oh, I certainly do. I certainly do. It was September 29th, 1990. I was in Denmark recording the album, my second album, Prisoner of a Dream. And I was in Copenhagen, and we had a gig on the weekend in a little town called Holstebro, Denmark. It was the Holstebro Music Festival, and it was in a big hall. There was about 2,000 people. And I was up on the stage playing. And at the very back of the hall, through all these people, I could see this beautiful blonde. And there was like almost like this light shining on her. It was very strange. And across the crowd, we were vibing like this. And she started moving toward the stage. And this is the truth. The crowd kind of parted like the Red Sea. And she came up and stood before the stage. And I was staring at her, and she was staring at me, and I fell over the microphone. I couldn't stop looking, and I was waving. I got to meet you, you know. And she'd go, yeah, I know. And anyway, we went out after the gig, and we walked around this little Danish town, this old, beautiful Danish town that's 1,000 years old, and walked the cobblestone streets and talked. And after about 45 minutes, I said to her, you're going to move to America. We're going to get married. We're going to have children, and we're going to get old together. And she said, what? You're out of your mind. We only met 45 minutes earlier. And I said, and you don't have any say in this, because this is meant to happen. This is just the way it is. You might as well just agree. And a week later, she agreed, and she had her own advertising agency. She closed up the agency and moved to the States. You want to hear her version of it?
Yeah.
Hey, Marie. So maybe you want to give your version of the night we met, because I know that sounds insane, but that's exactly what happened.
We want to hear your version now, Marie. We've heard Walter's version, and it was dramatic and romantic and all sorts. But give us the truth now.
What really happened?
Yeah.
Well, I was at this concert that I wasn't planning on going to. I was super tired. I had my own business, advertising sales business, and it was a Friday. No, it was actually a weekend night. I'd worked all day Saturday, and a friend convinces me to go on a train to this town that's like 80 miles from where I live, and it was just like, I don't want to go, but I really want to hear this band. And I get in the room, super tired. And there's this music, and I'm just like, holy crap, that's cool. Maybe it's a good thing I went. And it wasn't very long through the concert before our eyes met. And that was really strange. I was not a groupie. That was that sort of my thing, but there was this definite energy going on. Holy crap. And Walter started acting rather idiotic.
Me?
On stage. It was like embarrassing. I'm sorry, but that was like, holy crap. And everybody looking at me, and, because he's just making signs to me like, we got to meet and that kind of thing. And after the show, we actually did hook up. I managed to, I couldn't get backstage. There was a big beefy security guard who wouldn't let me backstage because Walter kept saying and signaling, we got to meet, you got to come backstage, you know, and I'm like, I get it. So Walter waited in the wings, and as I'm walking back out through the room, I hear this voice, hello, we have to talk. And, you know, we sat down at a table in the hall, and the guy, I mean, we just had an instant connection. It was unbelievable. It didn't take more than 35, 40 minutes of us being together before he told me we were going to get married and have kids. So.
See, true story.
It's like you guys have rehearsed this, like, you know, it's like you worked it out beforehand. It's uncanny.
I'm sorry, this happened. And I told him, you're out of your mind. You know, you gotta be crazy. That it doesn't work like this. And who do you think I am to buy into this kind of crap? You know, that's not how things work. You know, but he's like, well, you have no say in this. This is going to happen, which really annoyed me. You don't talk to me like that, you know. But here we are.
I knew.
Marie is your manager there now these days as well, isn't she? How's that working out for you?
Well, let me tell you, when Marie took over as my manager 28 years ago, we were so broke that I was pawning my Martin guitar to pay the rent. We did not have a reliable automobile because we couldn't afford it. I had these big time managers in Los Angeles, and they were stealing everything. I mean, the extent to which they ripped me off is incredible. And she kept telling me, you're getting ripped off. And I'm like, no, these guys are my friends. I go do a tour, and I pay the band, and I pay the crew, and I pay the airplanes, and I pay the hotels. And when I'm done, there's nothing left. So I would do a 10-week tour, and I'd come home with $1,500 at the end of 10 weeks.
Yep. And
she's like, no, you're getting ripped off. Well, finally, unbeknownst to me, I did the 10-week tour with the $1,500 at the end. That's making a total of $150 in a week for me. And at the time, I had the #1 album in Europe, which was Prisoner of a Dream. And she got the books from our London agent who booked the thing. And then she took the books from my manager, and she sat down and she found a discrepancy of like an insane amount of money. I don't want to go into figures, but it was in the tens of thousands of dollars in discrepancy missing. She sat me down and she proved it. She said, okay, I've been telling you this all along. Check this shit out. She proved it. Called up my manager, said, hey man, come on over. Let's talk about the future. We hid a video camera in the bookshelf. She put out the 2 books, said, well, hey, look at this. There's a whole more money than most people make in a year missing on one tour. And he just said, you got me. You caught me. I have your money. I took it. I live legally. I live in Mexico. All your money is in a bank in Mexico. If you want to get it back, you're going to have to sue me in Mexico. And he walked out the door. And that's when she took over.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was one of my best friends.
Was, eh? So that was the good old days of rock and roll, right? That was,
yeah. But
things are much better now, right?
So she discovered that, and then she took over. And since then, and the first thing she did was, okay, when you tour, we're going to cut down these expenses. You know, we're going to take a look at the expenses. How much do you need to spend here? How much do you need to spend there? How can we save some money here? And she actually made it quite lucrative for me to actually be a musician, you know?
Surely not.
So yeah, she's killing it, man. And a lot of my friends, a couple of whom are very well known. I think you play their records. have called her up and asked her to manage them. And she says, I'm a one artist manager.
You're a lot of work, dude.
Yeah, I'll be on the phone soon as well. So, so let's get back to these days. Really, I mean, you know, you're playing. You were planning a tour. Obviously, things are going to be put on hold for a bit, right? I mean, but 29 albums under your own name. I mean, that's an astonishing amount. I hear you get a medal for 30. So, I mean, you know, that's something to aim for. But do you ever see a time when you might think, Joe, what, enough is enough. I'm going to hang up the guitar. I'm going to retire. Do you ever see that happening?
No. I'm doing what I love, man. You know, why would I, when you're doing what you love and what nourishes you and sustains you in your soul and in your heart, why would you stop doing that? I take my inspiration from guys like John Lee Hooker, who was 85 and did a gig 2 days before he died, and Mr. Mayall, who's 86 and who at the end of the year, I'm supposed to go out and do a tour of America on a double bill with Mr. Mayall, you know, and he's 86, man, and he's still, you know, he was very, very sick a year ago, and he almost died twice, which a lot of people don't know. But right after he got out of the hospital, after he had come through it, he called me up and I said, so John, man, you made it through and you're home now. How are you doing? His first words, I'm bored. I can't wait to get back to work. And he went in the studio and recorded an album. You know, he said, I'm not well enough that I can go tour, but I can go down the street into the studio and make a record. And that's what he did. And I take inspiration from those guys. I want to be an artist. And I want to be an artist who is honest in what I present to people. This is me. And that's the essence of my life. And that's just who I am. And I don't have to, you know, hit pop stardom, and I don't have to any of that shit. I get up every morning, especially after, you know, 6 years ago, I was dead and I had a liver transplant and I came through it. So I get up every morning. The first thing I think to myself is, what am I grateful for today? You know, I'm going to lose it here, but I have a career, I have a wife, I have children, I have a nice house, and I do it all by creating whatever I can create and presenting it to people and having them enjoy it and send me a message and shake my hand and say, your music means something to me. What else do you want in life, you know?
Absolutely. You're a very lucky man, Walter. I tell you, a very lucky man indeed. I've got a couple of fan questions for you, if that's cool. Ron Platt says, are you going to do another book for the rest of the story?
Well, it's funny. You know, I actually spoke on the phone with Henry Yates just about a week ago, because for the release of my new album, he's doing the press release. He's doing the bio. And he's the guy who wrote the biography of me. Well, that biography ends when I have liver disease and they don't think I'm going to live. And it ends like, we don't know if this guy's going to survive this, but he's had a pretty good run. And that's where the book ends. And I was saying, I was telling him, wouldn't it be great if we could do another chapter? Yeah, the guy came through it. He had to relearn how to play. I had to relearn how to play because I had brain damage. And when I got out of the hospital, I'd been in bed. I'd been there for 8 months in the hospital bed. I had brain damage. I had to relearn how to speak and walk. And when I got home, I couldn't play the guitar anymore. So I had to start over from scratch. And I did. And I worked on it 6-7 hours a day for a year. And when it was time to see if I could get on stage and play a gig, I made my return to the stage at Royal Albert Hall. And I mean, there is a story in there. And in the preceding, it's going to be 6 years, May the 26th It'll be 6 years. In those 6 years, with this album, I will have released 5 albums in 6 years since I came back. And I've had my own band now for 31 years, and I've done 29 albums. You know, I like creating.
That's some record, really. I mean, that is you're really going for that medal at 30, aren't you? It's there's 2 medals for 60, so you got to start working on that, man. Yeah.
Well,
albums.
I learned a work ethic from John Mayall, and that man has a work ethic like nobody I've ever seen. One tour we did with him, we did 78 cities in 65 days. So think about that one. That's where on a Saturday afternoon, you play at a festival at 2 p.m, and then you pack up the gear and you drive 100 miles and play at a club at midnight, right? And 78 cities in 65 days. So that man has a work ethic like nobody else I know. He truly loves what he does. And I have tried to, I believe in that work ethic.
Lee Woodham's sent in a question, and he wants to know, I mean, out of all the people who went through the Bluesbreakers, obviously there's a lot of musicians there, were there any guys that you think, God, I would have liked to work with him?
You know, I mean, there's always the 3 famous guitar players, the Eric Clapton, Mick Taylor, and Peter Green, and I've done a lot of work now with Mick Taylor. I love Eric Clapton's playing, and I respect him so much, but I think my own self, I think Peter Green was probably the greatest British blueser. That's just my own humble opinion, though. You know, I have my own opinions. I think Steve Marriott was the greatest British rocker, but that's just me. And I don't want to argue about it. It's just my own opinion, right? But I think Peter Green, some of the stuff he did was just the greatest British blues stuff. And he was a big influence on me. I don't try to play like him because I can't. But as far as guys that went through the Bluesbreakers, he's one that I'm in awe of what he did.
So I want you to think about this. This is our killer question, and it's the end of the world. There's it's easy to imagine now, right?
especially, yeah.
There's a big
going politically, but over here, yeah especially.
Imagine this. There's a big meteorite on the way. It's coming from space, and it's going to hit in like 3 days or something. And the world president said to you, he said, Walter, we need to have this big party to go out with. We want you to put the band together. Who's going to be in your band, and what song are you going to play?
Oh man, you know, I gotta tell you what I would probably do, and this again is just me. I would probably call up the Rolling Stones and say, why don't you go out there and play Start Me Up and let me sit in with you guys? You know, that'd probably be it. I'm a mega fan of those guys.
I mean, that'd be pretty cool,
and
right?
That's a band that if I ever got to jam with them, you could kill me at the end. Okay, I've lived my life now. But that'd probably be it for me. I think those guys sound better now than they did 40 years ago, you know. But that, again, this is all just me. You put something like this up on Facebook, and then you get all this people want to argue this and argue that. And I'm like, hey, it's just my opinion. It ain't worth a shit. You can have your own opinion too, you know. But that's probably what I'd do, you know, get up on stage with Keith Richards and go, hey, man, after the meteor hits, you're going to be the only one left, you know.
Yeah, you want to stay close to Keith, eh? You just, you never know. That's such a great answer, Walter. I love that. Fantastic answer. We kind of run out of time. We've come to the end of our time. So I just want to say, Walter, it's been just brilliant talking to you. Your stories are fantastic. I could sit here and listen to you all night.
Well, if you ever want to do this again, man, I'm just the tip of the iceberg with some of the stories. I got some stories about John Lee Hooker and a couple about Big Mama Thornton that are pretty awesome. And I got a whole lot about Mr. Mayall. They're all good, but he is a very eccentric fellow. And I have some great, I love the man, but I have some great stories. He's a road warrior, you know. But thank you for having me on this. This has really been fun. This has been great.
Fantastic. Yeah, we definitely have to do a part 2 for sure. Yeah, and then a part 3, and yeah, which just makes it a weekly thing, right? You know, just
anytime you want. And I really look forward to all of this someday getting back to some semblance of normality, so that I can get back to the UK and play for the people back there, and maybe we can go hang out, and I'll buy you a beer and you buy me a club soda.
That sounds awesome, man. That sounds awesome. Yeah. As soon as this all gets back to normal, I want to see you back on the road doing what you do best, you know, because you're one of those guys that definitely, I can see it when you're playing. You're just there for the playing. You absolutely love it, don't you? So I want to see you back up on stage.
And thank you again for having me on here. I really had a great time talking with you guys. I could sit here for hours with you guys.
So if you've enjoyed this, why not like and subscribe to the Blues Podcast right now? All right.